The man at the corner table looked like he belonged there, weathered hands wrapped around a coffee mug, work boots still carrying sawdust from the morning's job, eyes that moved across the room the way certain men's eyes always move, quietly cataloging exits and edges without anyone noticing. He had spent 16 years learning to read danger in the set of a stranger's shoulders, in the particular way a man's weight shifted before violence arrived. So when three men walked through the cafe door and headed straight toward the woman in the wheelchair, Damon Hale already knew what was coming. He just hadn't decided yet whether to let it. If this story already has its hooks in you, you're in the right place. Subscribe to the channel right now and hit that like button so you don't miss a single episode. Drop a comment below and tell us what city or country you're watching from. Stories like this one travel further than we ever expect. Now let's begin. The coffee at Willow Creek Cafe was never exceptional, and Damon Hale had long stopped expecting it to be. What he came for on Saturday mornings wasn't the coffee. It was the 45 minutes of sitting somewhere that wasn't his house, wasn't a job site, wasn't the bleachers at Maya soccer field someplace where no one needed anything from him and he didn't owe anyone a conversation. He came for the particular silence of being anonymous inside a room full of people who weren't paying attention to him. He had chosen the corner table by habit. 16 years of habit, actually. The Navy had burned certain instincts into him so deeply that they operated on their own now, independent of conscious thought. Corner seat, back to the wall, clear view of the entrance. He was just a 45-minute civilian having coffee, but some parts of the brain don't get the memo when you file your discharge papers. Silverbrook, New Hampshire was the kind of town that appeared in photographs on real estate websites alongside like charming and close-knit, which meant it was small enough that everyone knew roughly who you were, but still decent enough to pretend they didn't know everything. Damon had moved there nearly 3 years ago, after Maya's school counselor suggested that what his daughter needed, what both of them needed, wasn't another military base town full of people who would look at them with that particular brand of careful sympathy. Maya needed normal. He needed to figure out what normal looked like for a 37-year-old former Navy SEAL who had spent the better part of 2 decades learning to be very good at things the civilian world had no use for. He'd picked up carpentry during his second deployment from an old warrant officer named Castillo, who said working with your hands was the only honest conversation left in the world. Damon had been skeptical. Castillo had handed him a piece of mahogany and a plane and told him to get started, and by the end of that first afternoon, Damon understood what he meant. Wood didn't lie to you. It told you exactly what it was, what it could hold, where it would split if you pushed it wrong. He liked that about it. 3 years in Silverbrook, he had a small client list, a decent reputation, a daughter who was 12 going on 35, and a life that looked, from the outside, like something a man could be grateful for. Most days, he almost was. He was working on his second cup and a mental inventory of the custom shelving job he was starting Monday when the bell above the cafe door pulled his attention up. Not because he was looking he wasn't, but because certain sounds register below the level of intention. 3 men. The way they walked said something. Not something he could have put into words exactly. Just a density of motion, a quality of taking up space that had nothing to do with their physical size. The leader was maybe 32, 33. Medium height, heavy through the shoulders, the kind of build that came from a gym rather than work. He wore his hair close-cropped and had a jaw that looked like it had met a few surfaces it wasn't supposed to. His 2 companions were larger, quieter, content to follow his rhythm. All 3 of them were scanning the room as they walked in, not looking for a table, looking for something they already knew was there. Damon looked at what they were looking at. Celeste Rowan was at her usual spot, the large table near the window that had the best natural light and enough room for her to work comfortably. She was 30 years old, the CEO and founder of Rowan Adaptive Technologies, which Damon knew because Silverbrook was not a big enough town to avoid knowing things about its more visible residents. She had started her company 4 years ago, after a construction accident left her paralyzed from the waist down, and from what he'd gathered from the natural circulation of local conversation, the company had grown considerably faster than anyone predicted. She was always at that window table on Saturday mornings with a laptop and a coffee that she refilled twice, and she worked with the focused, slightly self-contained energy of someone who had learned that the world doesn't automatically make space for you, so you make it yourself. Damon had never spoken more than 8 or 9 words to her. He knew her name, he knew her general story, and he had a passing awareness that she was someone worth knowing. That was the extent of it. Silverbrook was charming and close-knit, but Damon had spent 3 years maintaining his own particular version of polite distance from everyone in it. The 3 men crossed the cafe and stopped at her table. The leader didn't pull up a chair. He stood above her, which Damon recognized as a choice rather than an accident, and said something that didn't carry across the room. Whatever it was, Celeste's expression didn't change much, just a slight tightening around the eyes. The looks of someone who has encountered this variety of situation before and knows that visible reaction is exactly what's being asked for. Damon set down his coffee. He didn't stand up yet. He watched. The man said something else. Louder this time, and this time Damon caught it. "Don't you think someone your size could do with a little less table?" One of the companions laughed. The sound of that laugh, that particular frequency of casual cruelty, was something Damon recognized from the distant past, from places he had mostly managed to stop thinking about. Celeste said something short and flat in response. Whatever it was, it didn't land the way she might have hoped. The leader reached out and put one hand on the edge of her table and pushed. Not hard enough to tip it, just hard enough to send her coffee skidding across the surface and the open laptop rattling against the edge. Coffee spread across the keyboard in a dark bloom. Celeste grabbed the laptop and held it clear, her jaw locked, her eyes moving up to the man's face with an expression that was neither fear nor concession. It was the look of someone containing themselves with considerable effort. Damon was already standing. He crossed the cafe without hurrying. There was a version of this that didn't have to get worse, and he would rather find it than the other kind. He stopped at a reasonable distance, close enough to be clear, far enough back to give the man a choice. "Hey," Damon said. The leader turned. "She's having her morning," Damon said. "You need something to drink. The counter's over there." The man looked at him. The look lasted a second or two longer than normal, which meant he was either calculating or remembering. Turned out to be the second thing. "Damon Hale," he said. Not a question. Damon didn't answer. "You don't remember me." Again, not a question, a declaration, delivered with the thin edge of something that had been sitting a long time. Why would you? You couldn't pick Colton out of a lineup either, could you? Until he was useful. The name landed somewhere in Damon's chest with a specific, dull weight. Colton Maddox had been a petty officer second class on the last operation Damon commanded before he put in his papers. A night action in terrain that turned out to be worse than the intelligence suggested, which was, in Damon's experience, the condition of nearly every operation once you were actually inside it. Colton Maddox had been 26 years old, had been good at his job, and had died in circumstances that Damon had spent 9 years carrying in the particular compartment where he stored the things he couldn't make right. He looked at the man standing in front of him and saw it now not the face he remembered, because he'd never known Bryce Maddox. But the resemblance was there around the eyes and in the set of the jaw. "I remember your brother," Damon said. "That's real comforting." Bryce stepped closer. 9 years I've been wanting to find you. Funny where you end up, right? Making chairs in New Hampshire. This doesn't have to go anywhere, Damon said. Yeah, it does. Bryce was close now. Too close. His 2 companions had shifted their positions without Damon seeing them move, which meant they'd done this before, and it was choreographed. The larger one was just off Damon's left shoulder. The second was behind him, near the cafe counter, where 2 young women were frozen in the particular stillness of people who have no idea what to do and are hoping someone else figures it out first. "Walk away," Damon said quietly. He wasn't performing calmness. Calmness was genuine, which was perhaps the more unsettling thing. His heart rate had barely moved. His hands were loose at his sides. He had been in worse rooms. Bryce swung. It was a decent right hook, fast, committed, thrown by someone who wasn't new to it. It would have connected cleanly with the jaw of most people. Damon stepped inside it, took the forearm on his shoulder instead of his face, redirected the momentum downward, turned his hips, and had Bryce Maddox face first against the nearest table with his arm locked behind his back before the man had fully processed that the punch had missed. The whole sequence took perhaps 2.5 seconds. The larger companion behind him started to move. Damon looked back at him over his shoulder, just looked, and the man stopped. "I'm not going to hurt him," Damon said. To the room, to nobody specifically, to whatever version of order was trying to reassemble itself around them. "Somebody call the police." Bryce was breathing hard against the table. "Get off me. When the police get here." You think you think nothing happened. You think you just get to live your little life. Be still, Damon said. Not loud, not unkind. Just flat and final. The voice of someone who has learned that the word can do the work of the shout if you use it correctly. Bryce went still. The police arrived in 11 minutes, which in a town the size of Silverbrook was nearly immediate. Damon released Bryce as soon as the officers came through the door, stepped back, and gave his account clearly and without elaboration. Bryce was restrained. The two companions questioned. Celeste spoke to an officer near the window about what had happened to her table and her laptop. The cafe noise reassembled itself, slowly the lowered voices, the kitchen sounds resuming, the coffee machine working again. One of the officers, a lieutenant named Grant Keller, who Damon recognized from 3 years of living in a small town, hung back after the initial statements. You know who that was? Keller asked. I know the family name, Damon said. Keller looked at him steadily. He was a compact man in his mid-40s with a salt and pepper mustache and the slightly tired eyes of someone who had been doing the job long enough to know how certain situations develop before they finish developing. Bryce Maddox did 5 years for violent assault. Out 14 months. He's not stable, Damon. He made that clear. What I'm telling you is that this morning is probably not the end of it. Keller lowered his voice slightly. 3 days ago, he was in a bar on Route 9, asking people if they knew where you lived. Somebody told him about Silverbrook. This wasn't a chance meeting. Damon absorbed that. Okay, Keller repeated, like he wasn't sure what to do with the response. You got a daughter. I know. Just keep your eyes open. Lieutenant, Damon said. I've had my eyes open since I was 21 years old. But thank you. Keller nodded once and went back toward the main group. Damon turned. Celeste was still at her table, laptop open, tilting it to inspect the keyboard. She had a paper napkin and was carefully working coffee out of the keys with a methodical, unsentimental focus that suggested she had handled worse inconveniences than this and preferred to deal with them quietly rather than make an event of them. He walked over. It dried some, she said without looking up. The E key is going to be interesting for a while. May I? He indicated the chair across from her. She looked up then. Her eyes were dark brown, direct, carrying a quality of assessment that wasn't unfriendly, but also wasn't automatic. She was deciding something. After a moment, she said, Sure. He sat down. I'm sorry that happened. You didn't do anything to be sorry for.
I know.
Still. She looked at him with a slight shift in expression that might have been the early stage of something warmer. Damon Hale, the carpenter. That's me. I know who you are. Small town. I know who you are too, he said, Rowan adaptive. She nodded, not dismissively, but as acknowledgement this was known, and we can move past it. Do you know those men? Damon was quiet for a moment. The honest answer was complicated, and he'd spent 3 years in Silverbrook building a life that didn't require him to explain complicated things to people he barely knew. But she was sitting across from him with coffee on her laptop because those men had come looking for him specifically, and she deserved at least the shape of the truth. One of them. His brother died during an operation I commanded. He's been carrying that for a while. She held his gaze. Something moved through her expression that wasn't pity. Not pity. Something more careful and considered than that. That's a heavy thing to carry. For both of us, Damon said. Then, because he didn't know what else to do with the sentence, I'm sorry about your coffee. She looked at the mug. I was almost done with it anyway. Outside, the police car was still at the curb, Bryce Maddox visible through the back window. He was staring at something ahead of him, not at the cafe. Not at Damon, just straightforward, jaw set, expression locked around something interior and long burning. Even from here, Damon could see it, the shape of a grief that had curdled into something that took up all the available space. He understood it, even as he recognized how dangerous it was. He turned back to Celeste, who had gone back to the laptop and was typing experimentally with the coffee-damaged E key, mouth pressing together in mild irritation each time it stuck. Damon picked up his coffee mug from where he'd set it on the edge of her table. It had gone cold. I'll let you work, he said. You don't have to, she started, then stopped herself. Looked at him. Yeah, okay. Thank you. For earlier. I didn't really do much. You stepped in, she said. Most people don't. He didn't have an answer for that, so he just nodded and carried his cold coffee back to his corner table. Outside, the police car pulled from the curb. The cafe bell rang as someone came in, oblivious to what the room had been 11 minutes ago, sitting down and opening a menu like it was just a Saturday, which it still was. It was still just a Saturday. Maya had another 40 minutes of practice. He had a shelving job to think through, and a grocery run after pickup, and a load of laundry that had been in the dryer since Thursday. He sat with his cold coffee and watched Celeste work across the room, and he had the first of several thoughts he would later recognize as the beginning of something he had not been expecting. Keller's words moved through him quietly. He was asking where you lived. Damon looked at the window, at the empty space at the curb where the police car had been. 3 years of quiet. 3 years of sawdust and soccer games and Saturday coffee and a daughter who had just started laughing again at the dinner table, genuinely laughing, the kind that reached her eyes. 3 years of building something careful and specific and deliberately small, because small things don't collapse the same way big ones do. He thought about Bryce Maddox's face in the back of that car. Forward stare, the jaw. Then he finished his coffee, cold as it was, and waited for Maya's practice to end. The week after the cafe should have been ordinary. It mostly was. Damon finished the shelving job on Monday, started measuring for a custom kitchen island on Wednesday, picked Maya up from school every afternoon at 3:15, made dinner, helped with homework, watched her fall asleep on the couch with her history textbook open across her chest. Ordinary things. The kind of things he had built his entire post-Navy existence around. But he noticed the truck on Tuesday. It was a dark blue F-150, parked on the far side of Clement Street when he pulled out of the driveway at 7:40 in the morning. It was still there when he came back through the neighborhood at 4 in the afternoon. Different spot, same truck. He didn't say anything to Maya. He didn't say anything to anyone. He just noted it the way he noted everything quietly, without visible reaction, filing it in the part of his mind that kept running tallies on things that might matter later. Wednesday it wasn't there. Thursday a different vehicle. Gray sedan older model, parked near the elementary school where Maya's soccer practices were held in the adjoining field. Damon sat in his truck in the pickup line and watched it in his rearview mirror for 12 minutes. The driver never got out. When Maya climbed in with her cleats in her hand and her shin guards still on because she always forgot to take them off before she got in the car, the sedan pulled away. He told himself it was coincidence. He knew it wasn't. Friday morning, he found the first message. It was a text from a number he didn't recognize, and it contained 6 words. Saturday practice starts at 9, right? He stared at it for a long moment. Maya was upstairs, still getting ready, and he could hear her moving around. The bathroom faucet running, the particular thump of her dropping something and not picking it up. Normal sounds. He looked at the 6 words on his screen and felt the particular cold clarity that used to arrive before operations, not fear exactly. More like the moment when the body stops pretending things are fine and starts getting ready. He didn't reply. He called Lieutenant Keller instead. Keller listened without interrupting. When Damon finished, there was a pause. Forward me the number. I'll run it. Another pause. Going to come back as a prepaid burner. Probably. Which means we can't do much with it officially. Not yet. Keller sounded like he was choosing words carefully. I can increase patrol frequency around your block and the school. That's what I've got right now, I know. Damon. Daughter, I'm handling it. Okay. Keller didn't push. Just don't handle it in a way that creates a different problem. I understand the difference, Damon said. Thank you, Grant. He hung up and stood in his kitchen for a moment, listening to the house. The faucet upstairs. The thump. Maya's voice, singing something to herself that she stopped, the second she realized he could probably hear it. He knew the particular way a 12-year-old pretended not to care that you'd caught them being happy. It was one of his favorite things in the world, and he kept that knowledge away from the cold clarity in his chest, in a separate place so that the two of them didn't contaminate each other. He drove her to soccer practice Saturday and sat in the stands and watched the whole thing without looking at his phone once. His eyes moving the perimeter of the field every 4 to 5 minutes with the mechanical patience of someone who has done long surveillance in worse conditions than a youth soccer field in New Hampshire. Nothing happened. Maya's team won a scrimmage. She scored once and missed twice, and was annoyed about the misses in the way that meant she cared, which he was always glad about the caring, not the misses. He did not go to the cafe. Instead, he drove past it on the way home and glanced through the front window. Celeste was at her table. He could see her profile, the lamp of her laptop screen, the coffee cup beside it. She looked like every other Saturday morning. He didn't stop. Monday, he got a call from a number he didn't recognize. This time he answered it. Still picking her up at 3:15? The voice was flat, deliberate. Bryce. Or did the schedule change? Damon said nothing for 3 seconds. He was parked in front of a hardware store on Main Street, engine running. Street was normal and bright and full of regular mid-morning activity. What do you want, Bryce? I want you to understand something. A pause, not theatrical, genuinely considered. The pause of a man who has been rehearsing this for a long time. I'm not done. The cops got in the way last weekend. That's fine, I've got time. You followed me to the cafe. You know where I live. You know where my daughter goes to school. What's the point of the calls? The point, Bryce said, is that I want you to know it's coming. I want you to have to think about it. Every single day. Damon was quiet. Nothing to say? I'm going to ask you one time, Damon said. Whatever you think happened with Colton, whatever story you've been carrying, you're working from incomplete information. I know you don't believe that. But I'm asking you to consider the possibility before this goes somewhere that can't be undone. My brother is dead. I know. He was 26 years old. I know that too. Then you know there's nothing to consider. The call ended. Damon sat in the hardware store parking lot for another 90 seconds, doing nothing. Then he went inside and bought the wood screws he'd stopped for and drove to the job site. He called his sister-in-law Renata that night after Maya was in bed. Renata was his late wife's younger sister, lived 40 minutes north in Concord, had always had a better relationship with Maya than most of the other extended family because she treated Maya like a person rather than a grief object. Maya called her Aunt Wren and texted her things she didn't tell Damon, which Damon considered a healthy arrangement. I need a favor, he said. Renata, to her credit, didn't ask a long string of questions. She asked one, is Maya in danger right now? Not right now. Possibly soon. I don't know yet. When do you need her? Not yet. I'll tell you when. I just need to know you're available. Damon, I'm always available for that kid. A beat. Are you okay? I'm fine. You always say that. Because I'm always fine. You're not always fine. You're always functional. Those are two different things. She let that sit there for a moment, and he didn't argue with it, because she wasn't wrong. Call me when you need me, anytime. Middle of the night. I don't care. He thanked her and hung up and sat on the edge of his bed in the dark for a while, not thinking about anything in particular. Or trying not to. The mind does what it does. He thought about Colton Maddox, age 26, good at his job, had a quiet sense of humor that emerged in unexpected places. The night before the operation, he'd been reading a paperback Western someone left in the team room, had dog-eared a page, and the book was still sitting there on the table the next evening when they came back, and Colton wasn't with them. Damon had put it in his personal bag because throwing it out felt wrong. He didn't know what happened to it after that. Probably still in a box somewhere. He thought about the sealed letter. He had carried it for 9 years. He knew it existed. He had not opened it because it was not addressed to him, and because opening it would have required knowing what to do with what was inside. And for 9 years, the right moment had not arrived, and so the letter had stayed sealed in the bottom of a lockbox with his discharge papers and Maya's birth certificate and a handful of other things that mattered enough to protect and were too complicated to look at regularly. He hadn't thought about the letter in a long time. He was thinking about it now. It was a Wednesday morning, 11 days after the cafe, that he pulled onto Ridgeline Road to pick up supplies from a client's house and saw Celeste's wheelchair ramp, or what was left of it. The ramp ran from her front door to the driveway he'd noticed it before, in the way you notice things in passing, a well-built piece of infrastructure, nothing remarkable. Now it was in pieces, not weathered, not deteriorated, broken. The central support had been knocked through from below, the side railings bent outward. The platform surface cracked across the middle. Someone had done it deliberately and not bothered to be subtle about it. Celeste was in the doorway. She was on her phone, and from the set of her jaw and the very deliberate way she was speaking into it, she was in the middle of what she probably called a professional disagreement and what most people would call an argument. She looked up and saw him, and her expression changed slightly, not relief, exactly, but the recognition of a known quantity, which was perhaps close enough. Pulled over. She ended her call as he got out of the truck. Don't say anything sympathetic, she said immediately. I wasn't planning to. The city accessibility office is telling me it'll take 2 to 3 weeks to get a contractor out for assessment, and the assessment has to happen before any repair can be approved, and the approval process is 4 to 6 weeks after that. She said it flatly, without the performance of outrage, just laying out facts. Which means I'm using the back service door for 2 months. Damon walked the length of the broken ramp without touching it, looking at the underside, the brake pattern, the way the support had given. Deliberate. No question about it. You'd have to know what you were doing, or at least know enough about the structure to hit it in the right place. Fix this, he said. She looked at him. You don't have to. It's not charity. I do this for a living. He looked back at her. I'll do it better than it was. Whoever did this won't be able to do it the same way twice. He paused. You know this wasn't random. A beat, I figured. Bryce Maddox. Because of the cafe, yes. She was quiet for a moment, working through something internally that she didn't put into words right away. Then, are you going to tell me I should be more careful or that I should stay somewhere else for a while? No. Good. Because I've had that conversation before and I find it deeply tedious. She put her phone away. When can you start? Tomorrow morning, if you can give me until then to source the materials. I've got the back door. Take what time you need. Came back the next morning with the right lumber, the right hardware, the right tools, and spent the better part of 6 hours rebuilding it. Not replacing rebuilding, which was different. He reinforced the central support with a steel sleeve that would have to be cut through rather than simply knocked aside. He set the platform on anchors that went deeper than the original. He rebuilt the railings with heavier gauge brackets and ran a secondary support rail along the underside of the whole structure that hadn't been there before. When he was done, the ramp was more solid than the house it was attached to. Celeste brought coffee out at some point in the mid-morning, navigating the back door and around the side of the house with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned long ago that making physical access look effortful was a gift to other people's discomfort, and she had no interest in giving it. She set a mug on the sawdorse near him without comment and sat nearby. They talked the way people talk when one of them is working and the other one is watching in stretches, with gaps, without the pressure of sustained eye contact making every sentence into a statement. He asked about the company, and she explained it more concisely than most people explained their work, which he respected. Accessible architecture, technology integration, smart systems that anticipated what buildings assumed a body could do and corrected for the assumption. Buildings are designed for a default person, she said, and the default person is a statistical fiction. My company does the math on everyone else. How did you end up starting it? He asked. He knew the outline of the story. He wanted to hear what she actually said about it. There was a pause. Not reluctance, more like she was deciding on the honest version rather than the practiced one. I was working as an architectural project manager. The site I was on, there was a railing on a third-floor walkway. I reached for it. It gave way and I fell. She said it simply, no drama in the recounting. Later, when the investigation happened, it turned out the anchors on that section had been tampered with. Not enough to be obvious. Enough. Someone did it deliberately. That was the conclusion. They never established motive well enough to prosecute anyone. My lawyer thought it was related to a contract dispute the firm had, and I was incidental, but she stopped. It doesn't matter now. What matters is I spent 14 months in various hospitals and rehab facilities, and when I came out, I understood, completely and practically, what it meant to encounter a world that had not been built with you in mind. So I built things differently. He straightened up from the railing he'd been checking and looked at her. You didn't take anything personally about what was done to you. She looked back at him steadily. I took everything personally. I just didn't let it make the decisions. A beat. Is that not what you did? When you left the SEALs? He thought about that honestly. Something like it. Messier. It's always messier, she said. Anyone who tells you they made a clean exit from something that broke them is either lying or they haven't finished grieving yet. He went back to work and didn't answer, because she was right and saying so felt like too much, and they'd only known each other properly for about 11 hours across 2 separate days. She went back inside at noon. He finished by early afternoon, tested the ramp 3 different ways, and was loading his truck when his phone rang. Unknown number, he answered. Saw your truck outside the Cripps house, Bryce said. Damon stopped moving. He stood very still on the sidewalk. Didn't take long, Bryce continued. I break her ramp, you run over to fix it. She's important to you. You're watching her house. Was. Don't need to anymore. I got what I needed. A short pause. You should have just stayed in your corner. I had a message for you. Delivering it to you directly. You made it bigger than that. Listen to me carefully, Damon said. His voice was level. Whatever you're thinking about involving her, don't. This is between you and me. She has nothing to do with Colton. You decided that. When you stepped up for her in that cafe, you made a statement. Bryce's voice had a patience to it that was more unsettling than anger would have been. This was not impulsive. This was someone who had spent a long time thinking. People think about what matters to you. They watch what you protect. You can't go around protecting things and expect people not to notice. If you touch her, what? You'll do what you did in the cafe? Call the cops again? A short, dry sound that wasn't quite a laugh. I did 5 years, Hale. 5 years doesn't scare me. There's nothing you can threaten me with that changes anything. Call ended. Damon stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, then walked back to Celeste's door and knocked. She opened it, looked at his expression, and said nothing. I need to tell you something, he said. She opened the door wider. He came in. He told her about Bryce, the full version, not the outline. The operation, Colton's death, the 9 years. The cafe, the messages, the truck outside his house, the text about Maya's practice schedule. He told her about the ramp and who he believed had done it and why. He watched her face as he spoke, and he watched her absorb it without going pale or getting the particular frightened look that required him to manage her reaction alongside everything else. She just listened, and when he finished, she said, What do you need from me? Be careful. Tell me if anything changes at your home, your office, anything. Don't go anywhere alone if you can help it for a while. Define a while. I don't know yet. She held his gaze. I'm not going to pretend I'm not unsettled by this. I am. But I'm also not going to restructure my life around a man who's trying to scare me. A pause. Is there something concrete I should do? Change the code on your front gate if you have one. Make sure your locks are good. Let me check your back door setup before I go. She nodded once. They went through to the back entrance. He checked the deadbolt and the frame and the exterior hinge placement and told her what needed to be reinforced. And she wrote it down in the direct way of someone who treated a problem as a list of things to address rather than a reason to be afraid. He was almost back to his truck when she called from the doorway. Damon. He turned. Thank you. For the ramp. She looked at it from the door, the new version, solid and plain, and clearly built to last. Better than it was. That's the point, he said. He drove back through Silverbrook, with the afternoon light going long across the road, and his mind working through the geometry of the problem. Bryce was not spontaneous. He was not making this up as he went. He had a picture of what he wanted, and he was moving toward it with the patience of someone who believed the outcome was already settled, and time was merely a technicality. And Damon's daughter went to school 5 days a week. Called Renata that evening. I might need you sooner than I thought, he said. Tell me when. He didn't tell Maya anything yet. He didn't know the right words, and she was 12 years old and had already absorbed more of the world's weight than she should have. He watched her eat dinner and argue that the homework was busy work, and ask if they could get a dog not for the first time, not for the last, and he said what he always said, which was his way of not saying no, while also not saying yes. And she accepted it with the resigned pragmatism of a kid who knew the answer, but had decided to keep asking on the reasonable theory that one day it might change. After she was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table with the picture in his mind, the one Bryce had just painted for him, without knowing it. You made a statement. People watch what you protect. He had spent 3 years protecting a small and specific thing, the quiet life he was building for his daughter in a town small enough that nothing could get lost in the noise. He had done it by staying under the visible surface, by not accumulating the kinds of connections and obligations that created exposure. By being the man at the corner table, not the man people remembered. In one morning at a cafe, he had walked away from that. He didn't regret it. He'd do it again. But he needed to think clearly about what it meant going forward, and thinking clearly was something he was still capable of, even when the thing he was thinking about had teeth. 3 days later, he found the photograph. It was slipped under his front door sometime during the school day, which meant after 7:40 in the morning and before 3 in the afternoon. He found it when he came home to drop off tools before the pickup run. It was a photograph printed on plain paper. Maya outside the school building, backpack on, talking to another kid while she waited. Her face had been circled with a black marker. No message, no words, just the circle, deliberate and unhurried, drawn by someone who knew that the image was enough and words would only dilute it. Damon stood in his front hallway and looked at it for a very long time. He had been in combat situations where the fear arrived late, after everything was over, and the body finally allowed itself to process what the mind had been holding back during the operational necessity of staying functional. He felt something like that now, not panic, not the sharp animal jolt of immediate danger, but the deep, cold recognition of what this was, what it meant. Bryce didn't want to frighten him anymore. The photograph wasn't a threat. It was a declaration. It was Bryce telling him, without any room for misunderstanding, that he knew where the actual target was, that he had located the thing most worth taking, that a man who understood unbearable loss knew exactly how to create it. Damon called Renata. "I need you now," he said. "Tonight if you can. I'll explain everything when you get here." She arrived at 7 with an overnight bag and the particular no-fuss energy of someone who had decided in the car on the way over that whatever was needed she would do, and there was no point in being dramatic about it. Damon told Maya that Aunt Ren wanted company for a little while, and that she was going to stay at Renata's place in Concord for a few days. And Maya, who was 12 and perceptive, and had her mother's instinct for reading a room, looked at him for a long beat and said, "Is everything okay?" "It will be," he said, which was not quite the same thing, and she knew it, but she also knew him well enough to know that he didn't say things he didn't mean. She hugged him at the door. She didn't make it a big deal, which meant she understood that it was one and was choosing not to say so. He held on for a second longer than she expected, and she let him, and then she got in Renata's car with her bag and her history textbook and a phone charger she almost forgot and went. He stood on the porch and watched the car until the taillights were gone. Then he went back inside to the kitchen table and sat down and thought very carefully about what came next, and what Bryce Maddox actually wanted, and what a man with nothing left to lose was really capable of. Pulled out his phone and looked at Keller's number for a moment. He would call him. He would do this right, by the book, the way that protected everyone and didn't create a different kind of damage. But first he needed to think. Outside, Silverbrook was settling into its ordinary Thursday evening. Somewhere down the block, someone's dog was barking at something it probably shouldn't have cared about. Porch light of the house across the street came on automatically in the growing dark. On the kitchen table in front of him sat the photograph, face down where he'd placed it so he didn't have to look at the circle around his daughter's face. He already knew what Bryce was going to demand. He was already beginning to think about what he was going to do about it. Bryce called the next morning at 6:47, before Silverbrook had fully woken up, while Damon was on his second cup of coffee, and the house was quiet in the particular way it got, when Maya wasn't in it, not peaceful exactly. More like a room with something missing from the corner where a piece of furniture used to be. "I want to meet," Bryce said. "Where?" Not a question. Damon already knew. It wouldn't be somewhere public, wouldn't be somewhere that offered him any structural advantage, wouldn't be anywhere that Bryce hadn't chosen, specifically because it served his purposes. He asked where's where anyway, because the answer would tell him something about how much Bryce had planned versus how much he was improvising. Old Harwick Mill. On Route 7 past the overpass. You know it? He knew it. Abandoned textile facility, closed for 15 years, sat on a parcel the county had been arguing over with a developer for most of that time. He'd driven past it dozens of times. Long building, metal roof, loading bays on the east side, a catwalk system running the interior that he knew from the outside architecture would be maybe 20 feet up. Kind of space that gave height to anyone positioned above and left ground-level occupants exposed. When Damon said, "Tonight, 9 o'clock, come alone." A pause with weight behind it. You know what happens if you don't. He did know. He'd been turning it over since the photograph, since the call 2 nights ago, since the moment Bryce had described watching his truck outside Celeste's house. He understood the architecture of what Bryce was building. The man was not a soldier and had never been one, but grief that has had 9 years to calcify into purpose develops its own operational logic. Bryce had watched, gathered information, identified points of leverage, and was now applying pressure to the ones most likely to produce the result he wanted. What Bryce wanted, Damon still wasn't entirely sure of. Not money. He'd said as much. Not an apology. Apologies don't require warehouses and photographs of children. What Bryce wanted was something that didn't have a clean name, something in the territory between punishment and witness. He wanted Damon to break in a way that could be observed. He wanted to watch the damage land. Damon had spent 16 years learning that the most dangerous men weren't the ones who wanted to win. They were the ones who had already decided they'd lost and were only interested in taking something down with them. He called Keller at 7:15. The lieutenant listened to all of it without interrupting the call. The location, the time, the implicit threat regarding both Maya and Celeste. When Damon finished, Keller was quiet for a moment that had thinking in it. "You're going," he said. Not a question. "Yes," he said alone. "I know what he said." Another pause. "If I put units near that mill and he sees them before you're inside, he panics and whatever backup plan he's got activates. You understand that. I understand it. Which is why you'd position them far enough out that he can't see them but close enough to move on a signal." Keller exhaled slowly. "You've done this before. Different contexts. Same geometry. I'm not running an unsanctioned operation, Damon. I need this by the book. It is by the book. A civilian is meeting with a man who has made credible threats against his family. That civilian is informing law enforcement in advance and requesting a coordinated response. Everything after that is your department's call." Keller was quiet again. Damon could hear him thinking through the liability, the logistics, the particular political arithmetic of a small-town police department being asked to run something that looked like a tactical operation. How many does he bring? At least 2. Probably the same 2 from the cafe. He uses them as the muscle layer between himself and direct action. He's not military, he plans with his emotions, but executes with other people. That tells you something about how he'll respond when the plan starts failing. He'll improvise. He'll panic and improvise, which is more dangerous than a clean plan, but also less coherent. "Terrific," Keller said, in the flat way of someone for whom terrific meant the opposite. "All right. I'll have 2 units on Route 7 behind the feed supply building, and I'll put Vasquez and Okafor inside the structure before you arrive. Radio contact through an earpiece, you carrying one of those?" "I have one, of course you do." A brief pause. "Damon, this goes sideways. I know where the line is. I'm not talking about the legal line. I'm talking about you personally. He's going to say things in there designed to get under your skin. Things about his brother. He's been sharpening those words for 9 years." Damon looked out the kitchen window at the backyard, at the wooden swing set he'd built for Maya 2 summers ago, when she decided she was too old for one, and then used it every afternoon anyway when she thought he wasn't watching. "I'll be all right," he said. "Yeah." Keller didn't sound convinced. "Call me at 6 this evening with confirmation." He spent the day working. Not because he had a job scheduled, he didn't, but because sitting still had never been his way of managing anything, and the alternative was 7 hours of thinking in an empty house, which would help nobody. He drove to a lumber yard 40 minutes out and picked up material for a project he'd been putting off, came back, set up in the garage, and worked on building a storage bench he'd promised a client before any of this started. Measured, cut, fitted, sanded. The work was simple enough to do without full attention and absorbing enough to occupy the part of his mind that would otherwise loop. Around 2 in the afternoon, he called Renata. Maya answered before Renata could, which meant she'd been near the phone. "Hey, Dad, hey. How's Concord? Smaller than I thought. Aunt Wren's apartment has a cat that she didn't mention when she picked me up."
"Are you allergic?"
"No, but I feel like it was relevant information. His name is apparently Gerald. Gerald the cat. Gerald. She's had him for 3 years, and you've never been to her apartment, so this is news to both of us." A small pause, and then Maya's voice shifted slightly, lost the performance. "Are you okay?" He set down the chisel he was holding. "I'm good. You're not going to do something dumb, right?" "When have I ever done something dumb?" "I'm 12, not 4. Another pause. "I know something's going on. Aunt Wren doesn't just spontaneously want company. She's very self-sufficient." He didn't answer right away, which was its own kind of answer, and he knew she'd read it accurately because she always did. "I'm handling something. It's almost done. You'll be home by the weekend." "Dad, yeah. Whatever it is, just be careful. Okay? Like, actually careful. Not careful the way you define it. How do I define it? As whatever allows you to do the thing anyway." He sat with that for a moment. The garage smelled like fresh sawdust and linseed oil. Outside, a car passed on the street and was gone. "I love you, kid," he said.
"I know."
Her voice had gone a little tight, the way it got when she was containing something. "I love you too. Call me tomorrow." He told her he would. He hung up and sat in the garage for a while, with the half-built bench in front of him and the quiet around him, and then he picked up the chisel and got back to work. 6, he called Keller. At 7:30, he ate something: eggs, toast, nothing elaborate, and checked the earpiece. At 8, he put on a dark jacket and drove toward Route 7. He parked 6/10 of a mile from the mill and walked the rest. The night was cool and clear, The kind of fall evening in New Hampshire that smells like wood smoke and cold coming, something. And he walked the shoulder of Route 7 without using his phone light, letting his eyes adjust and hold the dark. He had a handgun in his waistband, properly holstered, legally carried, and he had no intention of using it unless something went profoundly wrong in a way he could not address otherwise. Carrying it was not optimism. It was the same reason he wore a seatbelt in a town where he'd driven for 3 years without an accident. The mill was dark except for a construction light someone had rigged in the main floor, a single work lamp that threw harsh shadows across the concrete and steel and made the catwalk system above look like a crow's nest above a gutted ship. He entered through the loading bay on the east side, as he'd expected to. The door had been left open, which told him he was being watched on approach. He stood inside the door for a moment and let his eyes finish adjusting. Space was large, maybe 180 feet of floor, 12-foot ceilings dropping to the main bay and then opening up above to the catwalk at 20. Debris on the floor, old equipment frames rusting against the far wall, the smell of standing water somewhere behind the near partition. His ears cataloged the space, the creak of the roof, the distant sound of Route 7, something dripping. And underneath all of that, 2 sets of breathing that weren't his. One near the partition, one above, on the catwalk, which meant they had positioned someone up there before he arrived. 3 men total was his expectation. He'd arrived to find at least 2 already in place, which confirmed Bryce had been here for a while. You found it. Bryce's voice came from the far end of the floor, near the work lamp. He stepped out of the shadow and into the light, and Damon had his first real look at him since the cafe. He looked worse, not worse in the way a man looks when he's been under stress. Worse in the way a man looks when something inside him is losing a fight it started losing a long time ago. His face was yellowish under the work lamp, which might have been the light's quality, or might not have been. His eyes were the same as they'd been in the cafe, the same long burning, fixed intensity, but they sat now in deeper hollows, and the skin beneath them had a texture of exhaustion that wasn't temporary. Damon walked toward him. Not fast, not slow, even. You came alone, Bryce said. You asked me to. I wasn't sure you'd do it. Here I am. Bryce studied him for a moment. The 2 men on his flanks were where Damon had placed them, one near the partition on his left, one on the catwalk above and to his right. Catwalk man was partially visible. If you looked directly up and angled your eye along the steel beam, Damon had clocked him in the first 15 seconds. He did not look up again. You know why I brought you here, Bryce said. Tell me anyway. I want you to account for yourself. He said it with a flatness that was almost formal, like a man reading from a document he'd written and revised many times. I want you to stand in front of me and explain how you made the decision that killed my brother. We're not going to agree on what happened that night. Try anyway. Damon looked at him steadily. The intelligence we had placed 3 enemy combatants in the extraction corridor. There were 8. The discrepancy wasn't discovered until we were already committed. When contact was made, 2 of our men were pinned in the southeast quadrant. 6 were moving toward the extraction point. Colton, he stopped. Started again. Colton was the one closest to the pinned position. He assessed the situation faster than anyone else did, and he made a decision without waiting for my order. He held the position so the other 6 could move. That's what happened. Bryce was very still. I didn't order him to do it, Damon said. I didn't leave him. He chose. In about 4 seconds, he looked at the situation and he chose. That's the man he was. He was 26 years old. Bryce's voice had changed, not softer exactly, but different, like a wall that had developed a crack along the load-bearing section. He was supposed to come home. He had a girl he was going to propose to. He had plans. I know. You don't know. You wrote me a letter. A form letter, basically. Expressed regret. Thanked me for his service. His jaw tightened. You didn't know a damn thing about him. That's not entirely true. Damon's voice stayed level. The night before the operation, Colton and I talked for about 20 minutes in the team room. He was reading a Western somebody left in there. He showed me a paragraph he thought was funny. It wasn't that funny, and he knew it, but he thought it was, so he showed me anyway. He paused. He told me he had a brother who was 7 years younger, that you used to take him fishing when he was a kid, before your father left, and that he thought about that sometimes when things got difficult. He said it like he was embarrassed to mention it. Another pause. I remembered that. Bryce's face did something that he didn't intend it to do. Something crossed it briefly, not rage, not grief. something in between that had nowhere to go, and so just moved across his expression and was gone. That doesn't fix anything, Bryce said. His voice was rough. I know. A silence opened between them. In the silence, Damon heard Keller's voice through the earpiece, so quiet it was barely air. 2 units moving to the south door. Hold position. He didn't react. I'm dying. Bryce said it without preamble, without the performance he might have brought to it in a different version of this conversation. Just said it. Flat and plain. Liver advanced. I've got, they said, maybe 5 months. Maybe less. He looked at Damon with an expression that was too complicated to name. I spent the better part of a decade wanting to find you, and when I finally did, I didn't have enough time left to do it right. That's a very specific kind of unfair. Damon didn't look away from him. What did you want to do? When you found me, I wanted you to suffer. No hesitation. I wanted to take everything you had and watch you understand what it felt like. Your daughter. Whatever you were building with that woman. All of it. I wanted you to know what it's like to lose something you can't get back. He said it without apology, which Damon respected more than if he'd softened it. And now? Bryce looked at him for a long moment. Now I'm standing in an abandoned building with 5 months on the clock, and I'm talking to you about a Western paperback. Something moved through his expression, and I don't know what that means. There's something I need to tell you, Damon said. Something I should have figured out how to tell you years ago. Bryce went still in a different way than before. Wary now. Alert. The night before the operation, Damon said, Colton came to my bunk after the rest of the team was down. He had an envelope. Sealed. He gave it to me and he said his exact words. He said, if something happens, make sure Bryce gets this. Not my commanding officer. Not official next of kin channels. You specifically. By name, he held Bryce's gaze. I've had that letter for 9 years. The silence that followed had a different quality than any of the silences before it. It was the silence of a man whose entire structural framework for a story he's been living inside is suddenly in question. You what? Bryce's voice had gone very quiet. I have the letter. It's sealed. I haven't opened it. It was addressed to you. Why would you? Bryce stopped. Started again. 9 years. I didn't know how to find you at first. And then when I did know, when the letter from your lawyer came 2 years after Colton died, he paused. I was still figuring out what to say, and then more time passed. And I kept thinking there would be a right moment, and there never was. He held up a hand slightly. I'm not defending it. I'm telling you what happened. Bryce stared at him. His eyes had changed. The long-burning thing was still there, but it had company now, something raw and confused, and 26 years old the way only grief can be, no matter how much time has actually passed. Where is it? He said. Safe, I'll get it to you. Damon kept his voice level. That's a promise. Whatever happens tonight, whatever you decide to do with any of this, the letter reaches you. That's a commitment I'm making right now. Bryce turned his face away. His jaw was working. His hand, Damon noticed, had come up and was pressing against the front of his jacket. Over his sternum, the unconscious gesture of a man holding himself together at a structural level. Then, without turning back, he said, "Show him." Damon went cold. Bryce pulled his phone from his jacket pocket and the screen toward him. On it was a camera feed, small, slightly compressed, the way a hidden camera looks when it's been placed by someone who knows enough but not too much. The image was of an interior room, a kitchen, partially visible. Then the camera shifted slightly. It wasn't mounted. It was handheld or body-mounted on whoever was outside, and he could see into what was clearly a living room. Celeste's living room. The particular layout of her furniture, the wide doorframe she'd had widened to accommodate her chair, the stack of architectural drawings on her side table. She was in the room. She was on her phone, standing near the window the way she stopped in various spots to look out at when she was on a call, a habit he had noticed during the hours he'd spent rebuilding her ramp. She didn't know she was being watched. She looked normal. She looked like herself. The camera stayed on her, and Damon looked at the image on Bryce's phone and understood precisely what was being communicated. One call, Bryce said, "He goes in." No, Damon's voice was steady. Yes. Bryce looked at him now. His expression had closed back up, the crack sealed over, the operational logic reasserted. You want to talk about Colton's letter? Fine. After. First, you're going to understand what it costs, the same way I understood what it costs. He watched Damon's face. There's nowhere to go with this. Nobody knows you're here. Bryce. Damon's voice was very even. Put the phone down. Or what? Keller's voice in his ear, barely a breath. We have the exterior. Man is in custody. On your mark. The relief that moved through him was physical, a release of something he'd been holding in his chest since the moment the camera feed appeared. He kept his face neutral. Or this, Damon said, and looked up toward the catwalk. Vasquez stepped out of the shadows at the far end of the upper level, badge visible, weapon drawn, and held in the low-ready position. From behind the partition on the ground floor, Okafor emerged. Same posture. The loading bay behind Damon, the main doors opened, and 2 more officers came through. Bryce's face went through several expressions, very quickly shock, then calculation, then something that collapsed into a kind of exhausted fury. You said alone. The man outside Celeste's house is already in custody, Damon said. Your phone is showing you a recording, Bryce, not a live feed. They pulled him 20 minutes ago. Bryce looked at the phone, looked at Damon. Something in him, some last load-bearing thing, seemed to buckle quietly. What happened next took perhaps 6 seconds and required Damon to move faster than he had moved in 3 years. The man on the catwalk, not Vasquez, the other one. Bryce's man, who had been up there since before Damon arrived, and who Damon had clocked in the first 15 seconds, but whose exact position in the shadows he had underestimated, moved. He had a weapon. Damon heard it before he saw it, the specific metallic sound of a slide, and he was already moving left and down when the shot erupted through the mill with a concussive bang that bounced off every steel surface in the building simultaneously. He didn't know where it went. He knew it missed him because he was still moving. Okafor and Vasquez were responding above. He could hear the commands, the second set of footsteps on the catwalk, the crash of someone going to the deck up there. He was already at the ground-level man near the partition, who had started to move in the confusion, and Damon had him by the wrist and elbow before the man had gotten his footing properly, leveraged him forward using his own momentum, took him to the ground with controlled economy, and held him there with a knee and a joint lock that communicated in the clearest possible terms that further movement would be counterproductive. The whole thing, from the shot to the ground, was maybe 5 seconds. Don't, Damon said quietly to the man under his knee. The man did not. On the catwalk above, voices, commands, compliant sounds. The weapon recovered. From outside the building, more footsteps, the additional units coming through the south door. Bryce had not run. He was standing near the work lamp where he'd been standing all along, and Damon looked at him from across the floor, and Bryce looked back, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Keller came through the loading bay door with 2 officers behind him, took in the scene, said something quietly to his people, and they moved to secure the situation with the practiced organization of people who had trained for this, even if they didn't do it often. Damon stood up from the man on the floor and let Okafor take him. He straightened his jacket. His pulse was elevated, not dramatically, but he could feel it, and he gave himself a moment to let it settle. His hands were steady. They had always been steady. He wasn't sure if that was a good quality or just a sign of something having calcified, and he'd never been able to decide which. Keller came to stand beside him while his officers worked. He looked at Damon for a moment. You hit? No. Your jacket is torn. Damon looked at his left shoulder. The jacket was torn along the seam contact, not a bullet. The catwalk man's shot had gone somewhere into the wall above the partition. I moved, he said. I noticed. Keller watched his people. The man outside Rowan's house is talking. He's the smaller of the 2 from the cafe. He's going to give us everything to avoid the weapons charge. Good. Keller looked at Bryce, who was being cuffed near the work lamp, with the empty, unfocused expression of someone whose plan has collapsed and who hasn't yet found a new story to put in its place. You didn't pull your weapon, Keller said. No, you were justified. I know, but you didn't, no. Damon looked at Bryce across the floor. I didn't come here to shoot him. I came here to end this. Keller looked at him for a long moment with the particular expression of a man who has seen enough of the world to know that restraint is neither natural nor easy, and who respected it accordingly. Then he went back to work. Damon walked to where Bryce was standing, slowly in the visible way that said he was not approaching to do anything except talk. The officer beside Bryce glanced at Keller, who nodded slightly. Damon stopped a few feet away. Bryce looked at him. His face had gone through exhaustion and arrived somewhere the other side of it. Not peace, nothing like that. Something more like a machine that had run out of fuel and was simply stopped now. Still, no longer generating heat. The letter, Damon said. I meant what I said. You'll have it. Bryce's jaw shifted. His eyes held Damon's with an expression that had too many things in it to read cleanly residual rage. Confusion, beginning of something that might have been grief, or might have been relief, or might have been both at once. Because the two have more in common than most people want to admit. Why, he said, barely a word. More like the shape of one. Because Colton asked me to get it to you, Damon said. And I was late. But I'm not going to be later. They stood looking at each other in the harsh light of the single work lamp, in the hollow of the abandoned mill with its smell of rust and standing water and cold concrete. And Damon thought about a 26-year-old man reading a Western paperback and laughing at something that wasn't that funny. And the sealed letter that had waited in a lockbox for 9 years, and the particular patience of words that haven't been read yet. The officer moved to take Bryce toward the door. Bryce went without resistance. At the door, he stopped once and looked back, not at Damon past him, at the space, at something that wasn't physically there. Then he went through, and the night took him. Keller team finished securing the scene. Damon sat on a concrete block near the wall and answered questions for 40 minutes, with the flat, accurate recall of someone trained to reconstruct events precisely. He told them everything. He held nothing back. When it was done, Keller walked him out through the loading bay, and they stood in the cold air of the parking area while the forensics team worked inside. "You're going to have to give a formal statement tomorrow," Keller said. "I know, and I'm going to need the letter. As evidence, initially. I'll bring it in." Keller nodded. He looked at the building for a moment, then at Damon. "I've been a cop for 22 years, he said. People who've been through what you've been through tonight, most of them are shaking, or talking too much, or doing the thing where they pretend they're fine while their hands do something their face isn't showing." Damon looked at him. "I'm not entirely fine, I know. I'm just noting that you're carrying it." A pause. "That's not easy either." Damon looked up at the sky. Clear night. Cold. The stars were the kind of clear that only happened when the temperature dropped fast, and they hung there above Route 7 and the mill and the whole long, awful evening with the complete indifference of things that have been there too long to be impressed by anything. "My daughter's in Concord," he said. "I need to call her." "Go," Keller said. He walked away from the building, away from the lights and the voices and the sound of the forensics team inside, until Route 7 was quiet around him and the only light was the sky. He took out his phone. It was 10:43. Maya would be awake. She'd been awake since the call at 2 this afternoon. He knew her. He called. She answered on the second ring. "Hey," she said. Her voice was careful, managed. "Hey." He stopped walking, stood on the shoulder of the road. "It's done." A silence. Then very quietly, "Are you okay?" "Yeah." He looked at the sky. "I think I'm actually okay." He heard her exhale. It was a long exhale, the kind that's been held for a while and is finally being released, and it was the best sound he'd heard in days. "Gerald the cat," she said after a moment, "has been sitting on my history book for 3 hours. That tracks. He has opinions about homework. Come home Saturday," Damon said. "I'll make pancakes." "With the blueberries?" "If they have blueberries at the store." "They always have blueberries, Dad. It's not like they're seasonal." "They're absolutely seasonal. You don't know that." "I'm a farmer's market person. I know exactly." "You go to the farmer's market twice a year." "Twice a year of expertise," he said, and he heard her laugh. Not the managed, careful version. The real one, the one that reached her eyes, even over the phone somehow, even from 40 miles away on a cold night on the shoulder of Route 7. He held on to it. After he hung up, he stood there for another minute before going back to his truck. The night was quiet around him. Somewhere in the building behind him, Keller's team was doing what it did. 2 men who'd come with Bryce were in custody. The man outside Celeste's house was already talking. And Bryce Maddox, for the first time in 9 years, was going somewhere that was not toward Damon. He didn't feel like he'd won anything. He knew better than to call it that. But he felt for the first time since the photograph appeared under his door that the variables were finally inside a boundary he could understand. That the shape of the problem had resolved from something sprawling and unpredictable into something with edges. He drove back through Silverbrook. The town was quiet. The porch lights were on. The occasional window lit from within families, whatever that meant for each of them, arranged in their particular shapes behind glass and warmth. He drove past Celeste's street without turning onto it. Too late to call. But the light was on in her front room, the one visible from the road, and he saw it as he passed. He went home. He sat in the kitchen for a while without turning on the light. The house was quiet in the Maya Not Here way, but it was different from before, now lighter, somehow. The way a room feels after a window's been opened. He thought about the letter. Tomorrow he would go to the lockbox. He would take out the sealed envelope with Bryce's name on it, in Colton's handwriting, and he would bring it to Keller, and eventually through whatever legal process had to happen. First, it would reach the man it was written for. 9 years late. But arriving, he didn't know what was inside it. He had always known, in the abstract and imprecise way, that you know things about a person after 20 minutes of real conversation, that Colton had been the kind of man who understood what mattered, who thought about his brother on difficult nights, who found a paragraph in a paperback Western worth sharing, even when it wasn't quite funny enough. Whatever was in that envelope, Damon had a reasonable sense it was enough. He got up from the table. He rinsed his coffee cup from the morning it was still there, from this morning, which felt like a week ago, and set it in the rack. He turned off the kitchen light. He climbed the stairs and passed Maya's room. The door open, the stars and moons on her ceiling barely visible in the dark. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he went to bed. He slept 5 hours, which was more than he'd expected. The formal statement took most of Saturday morning. Keller ran it himself in a room at the Silverbrook Police Department that smelled like old coffee and carpet that had seen better decades, with a recorder on the table and a younger officer taking supplemental notes in the corner. Damon went through everything in order: the cafe, the messages, the truck outside his house, the text about Maya's practice schedule, the destroyed ramp, the photograph, the calls, the warehouse. He was precise and he was complete, and he did not editorialize. Keller asked clarifying questions at intervals, the good kind, the kind that came from actually listening rather than waiting for the next slot to speak. When it was done, Keller set his pen down and looked at him. The DA is going to want to talk to you next week. Charges are being filed this morning. Bryce is looking at stalking, criminal threatening, conspiracy, the weapons charge from the catwalk that one belongs to his man. But there's an argument for accessory. The one outside Rowan's house pled out already. The man from the catwalk is still deciding whether to be cooperative. He'll cooperate, Damon said. He's not the type to absorb consequences for someone else's agenda. Probably right. Keller looked at him steadily. You brought the letter. Damon reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and placed the envelope on the table between them. It was a standard white envelope, the kind you could buy anywhere, slightly yellowed at the edges, from 9 years in a lockbox, but otherwise intact. Colton's handwriting on the front neat, left-leaning, with the particular economy of someone who'd written a lot of things by hand in conditions that didn't allow for flourishes. Bryce. Just the one word. Keller looked at it without touching it for a moment. Sealed all this time. Yes. You never opened it. It wasn't mine to open. Keller picked it up carefully, turned it over, examined the seal. It'll go into evidence. Could be a few weeks before it's released to him, depending on how the proceedings move. He set it down again. I'll make sure it gets to him. Personally. Damon nodded. He looked at the envelope for a moment, longer 9 years of looking at it, in the abstract, from the other side of a lockbox lid, and then he looked away. How's he doing? He said. Bryce. Keller's expression shifted slightly. Not surprise exactly, but a particular kind of attention, the look of someone recalibrating. He's in county. His public defender is good. Actually, a young woman named Karis. She knows what she's doing. He's not well physically. The facility doctor saw him this morning. He's being transferred to a medical unit this afternoon. A pause. He didn't ask about you, if that's what you're wondering. I wasn't wondering that. What were you wondering? Damon thought about it honestly. Whether he's going to have enough time, he said, to do something useful with however much he has left. Keller was quiet for a moment. That's a generous thing to wonder, given the week you had. It's not generous, it's practical. Damon picked up his coffee, found it had gone cold, set it back down. He spent 9 years building toward something that collapsed in one night. That's a specific kind of empty. It's not nothing. Keller looked at him with the expression of a man who had been a police officer for 22 years and had therefore developed an acute understanding of the difference between people who said things to seem a certain way and people who said things because that was actually what they thought. He seemed satisfied with what he found. I'll make sure the letter reaches him, he said again. You have my word. Damon drove to Concord to pick up Maya. Renata met him at the door of her apartment with the particular expression of a woman who has managed a 12-year-old for 4 days and has opinions she is exercising great restraint not to share. She's fine, Renata said, which meant Maya had been fine and also somewhat exhausting. which was simply what Maya was. Gerald grew on her. Gerald the cat. Don't say it like that. Gerald is a person. Gerald is a cat named Gerald. He has emotional depth. She stepped back to let him in. She's in the guest room on the phone. She's been on the phone with that girl from Soccer Priya for most of the morning. So apparently the crisis of not having regular access to her social world has resolved itself. She's 12. Crises resolve in 4 hours or less. Must be nice. Renata looked at him more carefully. You look like you slept. Some. How'd it go? It's handled. She studied him for a moment. She had her sister's eyes, Damon's wife, Claire, and sometimes that landed differently depending on the day. Today it landed with a kind of weight he noticed and absorbed without showing. You going to tell her anything? Renata asked. The relevant parts. Not all of it. She's going to ask questions. She always asks questions. She's going to ask good ones. I know. He looked down the hallway toward the guest room, where he could hear Maz's voice, the particular cadence of a conversation that had found its rhythm, the kind of talking that teenagers did where the content was almost secondary to the fact of the connection. I'll handle it. Renata put her hand on his arm briefly, not a gesture that required a response, just an acknowledgement, and went to make coffee. Maya appeared in the hallway 30 seconds later, phone still in hand, with the look of someone who had detected a change in the ambient conditions of the apartment. She saw him and something in her face shifted, a small and private relief that she mostly kept to herself, the way she kept most things. Hey, kid. She walked to him and let him hug her, which at 12 she didn't always, and he held on for a second. She smelled like Renata's shampoo. Gerald the cat appeared at the end of the hallway and regarded the whole scene with the profound moral neutrality of a cat. You're not going to tell me everything, are you? Maya said. Not a question. I'll tell you what matters. That's the same answer as before. I know. He pulled back and looked at her. She had Claire's eyes too, a little. Mostly she had her own eyes, which were a specific dark green that neither of them had been able to trace back to any family member, and which looked at the world with a directness that was sometimes inconvenient and always admirable. The man who was causing problems has been arrested. The police are handling it. You can go back to school, Monday, soccer practice, all of it. Done. She absorbed this. Was it because of the Navy stuff? From before? Yes. Is he going to be okay? The man? Damon looked at her for a moment. It was genuinely not the question he'd expected. He's sick, he said. Beyond the legal situation, he's not well. Maya considered this with the particular seriousness she brought to things she wasn't sure how to feel about. Is that why he did it? Because he was sick? Partly. Partly because he was angry for a long time about something that happened, and the anger didn't have anywhere to go. He paused. He lost his brother. My team was involved. He blamed me. Were you responsible? He looked at his daughter. 12 years old and asking the question directly, without preamble, without softening it. Complicated, he said. His brother made a choice that saved 8 people. I was his commanding officer. Whether that makes me responsible depends on how you define the word. Maya thought about this. Do you think you were responsible? I think about it, he said. I've always thought about it. I don't have a clean answer. She nodded. This seemed to satisfy her, not the content of the answer, but the honesty of it. The fact that he hadn't given her the easy version. Okay, she said. Can we go home? Gerald is great, but he's been stepping on my homework. Gerald has opinions about homework. I've been informed. He really does. She went to get her bag. Damon looked at Gerald. Gerald looked at Damon with the expression of a creature that has been where it is for a long time and has no particular plans to change. They drove back to Silverbrook in the early afternoon. Maya talking about soccer practice she'd missed, a thing Priya had said that was either funny or slightly mean, and she hadn't decided which, a book report she needed to finish. Normal conversation. The specific music of ordinary life coming back into tune. He made blueberries pancakes when they got home. They had blueberries at the store. He didn't say anything about this. Maya ate 4 pancakes, declared herself fine, and went upstairs to do the book report, leaving behind the particular aftermath of a 12-year-old at a kitchen table, a glass with an inch of milk in it, a fork that hadn't quite made it to the sink, a hair tie that had materialized from somewhere and now lived on the table forever. Damon cleaned up slowly and stood at the kitchen window for a while, looking at the backyard, at the swing set in the afternoon light, at the ordinary geometry of a Saturday that had arrived after a week that had tried very hard not to let it. He called Celeste. She answered on the 3rd ring. Hi. He leaned against the counter. I wanted to check in. Make sure everything was all right on your end. The officer who came by this morning was thorough. He explained what happened. A brief pause. Are you okay? Getting there. That means no. That means it's a process. He looked out the window. I should have told you earlier in the week that things might escalate toward you. I was trying to manage it without pulling you further into it, and that was probably the wrong call. Probably, she agreed. No anger in it, just the clean acknowledgement of the fact. But I understand why you made it. You're not going to give me a hard time about it? I reserve hard times for things that aren't already resolved and things where the person making the mistake doesn't already know it was one. A pause. You knew. I knew. Then we're past it. He heard her shift a small sound, the particular adjustment of someone repositioning in a chair. The police told me the man they arrested outside my house had been there for nearly an hour. I looked at my front window a dozen times that evening and didn't see anything. He was behind the service van across the street. Good position. How do you know where he was? Ah, another pause. Strange feeling. Knowing someone was out there and I had no idea. You weren't supposed to have an idea. That's the point of it. I know. I understand that, practically. The feeling is still strange. She said it without dramatics, just naming a fact about her interior experience, the way she tended to do things. I've spent 4 years building a company largely on the premise that I understand exactly what my environment is doing and where the access points are. The idea that someone was just outside my house, with a camera, she stopped. It bothers me more than I expected it to. That's reasonable. It doesn't feel reasonable. It feels like a flaw. Being bothered by a threat to your safety isn't a flaw. Being bothered by something I should have detected is. Celeste. He kept his voice level. He was a professional at this specific thing. Not at much else, but at watching people without being seen. You not detecting him is not a failure on your part. A silence. Then, okay. Okay. I'm choosing to accept that rather than argue about it, because I'm tired and you're probably right. Another small pause. How did the warehouse go? He gave her the outline. Not everything, but the shape of it, the confrontation. What Bryce had said about his illness. The letter, the way it had ended. He heard her listening. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. You've had that letter for 9 years, she said. Yes. That's a long time to carry something for someone who blamed you for his brother's death. I made a promise to his brother. I know. I'm just noting what it cost. She paused. What do you think is in it? He had thought about this. He'd thought about it on and off for 9 years and more specifically and urgently in the last week. I think Colton knew himself well enough to write what was true, he said. And I think the truth was probably harder for Bryce to hear than the story he built. Stories we build around grief tend to be, she said. They have to be. Otherwise, why build them? They stayed on the line for a moment after that without speaking, which was not uncomfortable, just two people who had arrived at the edge of a thing and were deciding whether to keep going or let it be for now. Outside Damon's kitchen window, the afternoon was turning toward evening, the light going lower and warmer against the fence. Coffee, he said finally. Tomorrow morning, if you're going to the cafe, a beat. I'll be there. He put the phone down and stood in the quiet kitchen. Maya's voice drifted from upstairs. She was talking to herself, the way she did when she was working through something, the particular mutter of a kid reading her own writing back and deciding it wasn't quite right. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a neighbor's car pulled into a driveway. He was still standing there when his phone lit up with a message from a number he didn't recognize, and his chest tightened before he'd even read it, and then he read it. This is Bryce. They let me use the phone for 15 minutes. I just wanted to say I know about the police being there. I know you set it up. I'm not writing this to be angry about it. I'm writing this because I want you to know I understand why you did it, even if I hate that you did. Damon read it twice. He set the phone on the counter. A second message arrived 40 seconds later. I need to know the letter is real, that you actually have it. If it's real, I need to know what to do with. I don't know what to do with any of this. 9 years and I don't know what to do. He picked the phone up and typed, the letter is real. It's been in my custody since the night before the operation. I gave it to the detective this morning. It will reach you through the legal process probably a few weeks. It's sealed. I never read it. That's the truth. He sent it. He waited. 3 minutes later, why didn't you open it? He thought about the honest answer. Typed, because it wasn't mine. Colton asked me to get it to you. Opening it would have been taking something that belonged to someone else. A longer wait this time. Nearly 8 minutes. Then he always said you were straight. I didn't want to believe anything good about you. For a long time, I needed you to be the worst version of what happened. Damon sat down at the kitchen table. He typed, I understand that. Did you know he was going to do it that night? When he held the position, he stared at the question for a long time. This was the one. The one he'd been asked in his own head, in the compartment where he stored the things that were too complicated to examine regularly, for 9 years. He typed the truth, not until it was already happening. He moved before I could countermand it. He was faster than the situation. Another wait. Then he was always faster than the situation. Even as a kid, he used to make decisions before everyone else knew there was a decision to make. Damon read that. Read it again. Felt something shift in his chest that had been in the same fixed position for a very long time. I don't know if I can forgive you, Bryce wrote. I don't know if that's even the right word for whatever this is. But I'm going to read the letter when I get it, and I'm going to, for his sake, I'm going to try to figure out what comes after this. Damon sat at the kitchen table in the gathering evening and thought about what to write back. He started several responses and deleted them. He thought about Colton, age 26, reading a paperback Western. He thought about a sealed envelope in a lockbox for 9 years. He thought about a man dying of liver failure in a county medical unit, holding a phone for 15 allowed minutes, writing things he probably hadn't planned to write. He didn't write anything back. He saved the messages. He sat there for a while and let the evening come in around the kitchen, the light changing. Maya's voice going quiet upstairs, the house settling into itself the way houses do when the day is ending, and the people inside it are somewhere between one thing and the next. On Monday, Keller called with an update that had a piece he hadn't expected. The letter is going to be released to Bryce by end of week, Keller said. The DA agreed it's not material to the prosecution. Everything we need is in the physical evidence and testimony. His defense attorney filed for expedited release, and the judge approved it this morning. A pause. I thought you'd want to know. I do. Thank you. There's something else. Keller's voice had a different quality, more careful. Bryce's public defender contacted me this morning. Bryce is asking through his attorney whether you'd be willing to talk to him. Not about the case. Not officially. Just talk. Before things move too far forward in the proceedings. A beat. You don't have to. It's entirely your call, and it has no bearing on anything legal. Damon was quiet for a moment. He was standing in the lumberyard 40 minutes from Silverbrook. Between stacks of white oak he was pricing for a new project, and the morning was cold and sharp and smelled like raw wood and frost. Tell his attorney I'll think about it, he said. I'll tell her. Keller paused. For what it's worth, she thinks it might do him some good. And she doesn't say things like that for nothing. I'll let you know by Wednesday. He thought about it for 2 days. He thought about it while he drove Maya to school, and while he worked, and while he made dinner, and while he sat on the back porch after Maya was in bed with a cup of coffee that went cold while he was sitting with it. He thought about what he owed the situation, and what he owed himself, and what would actually serve something beyond the legal resolution, which was complete, and the emotional resolution, which was not the same thing and never had been. He called Keller on Wednesday morning. I'll talk to him, he said. Neutral location. His attorney present if she wants to be. Not a long conversation. I'll set it up. The meeting happened on a Thursday afternoon in a room at the county medical facility. Not the cell block, the medical wing, which had the antiseptic brightness and functional furniture of a place designed to keep people alive rather than comfortable. Bryce's attorney, Karis, was a compact woman in her early 30s with reading glasses she kept pushing up and a legal pad that she held but didn't write on. Bryce was in a chair rather than a bed, which seemed to have been important to him, the effort of being upright rather than horizontal, the dignity of the choice. He looked worse than the warehouse. The yellow undertone Damon had noticed under the work lamp was more apparent in the fluorescent light of the medical wing, and he'd lost weight in 2 weeks, which said something Damon didn't want to say plainly about where the illness was. His eyes were the same, though. Still that long burning quality, but something had changed in what it was burning toward. Karis said, I'll be here if either of you needs to stop, and then she stepped back and became very quiet, which was a skill Damon appreciated. Bryce looked at Damon from across the table for a moment. You came, he said. I said I would. I know, I wasn't sure. Damon sat down. How are you doing? I'm dying in a county medical facility, Bryce said. How are you doing? Better than that. Something crossed Bryce's face that was almost a sound without being one. Not quite a laugh. The predecessor of one. Yeah, okay. He looked at his hands on the table. They were not steady, a fine tremor that had nothing to do with nerves and everything to do with the liver failing to do what livers are supposed to do. I got the letter yesterday. Damon waited. I read it 3 times. Bryce looked up. And then I sat with it for most of the night. His jaw worked. He said, Colton said he made the call himself, that he saw the position and he knew what it meant and he decided. He said you were a good commander who got handed an impossible situation and that anyone saying otherwise didn't know what they were talking about. He stopped, looked at a point on the table. He told me not to spend my life on bitterness. Exact words, don't waste your life being angry on my behalf, because I didn't waste mine being afraid. His voice had gone rough at the edges. He always did things like that, said the hardest thing in the most straightforward way, and then moved on, like saying, it should be enough. It sounds like him, Damon said. Bryce nodded. He wasn't looking at Damon directly, looking somewhere beside him, the way people do when they're trying to keep it together, and direct eye contact is one variable too many. I spent 9 years building a story, he said. You were the villain. Colton was the victim. I was the one who was going to make it right, he exhaled. And then I read 14 paragraphs in my dead brother's handwriting, and the whole story just... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Stories like that don't disappear because the facts don't support them, Damon said. They dissolve slowly. It takes time. I don't have a lot of time. I know. Bryce finally looked at him directly. I'm not going to tell you I forgive you. I'm not going to perform something I haven't actually gotten to yet. I'm not built for that. A pause. But I believe him. What he wrote. I believe it was true. His jaw tightened and released. Something, I think. That's a lot, Damon said. Bryce looked at the table again. He was a good person. Colton. Better than me in most respects. Smarter, calmer, kinder. A long pause. I was the one who got the anger gene in the family. He used to joke about it. Said I could find a grievance in a good weather report. Something shifted in his expression. He would not be proud of this last 9 years. What I did. Where I ended up. He looked at his own hands on the table. I don't know what he'd make of me. Damon thought about a 26-year-old man finding something worth laughing at in a paperback western at 11 o'clock at night before an operation that was going to kill him. The particular quality of a person who could do that. He loved you, Damon said. You were in the letter. Whatever else was in it, you were there. He was thinking about you. Bryce pressed his lips together. His eyes had gone bright in the way that wasn't going to be contained much longer, and he seemed to know it, and he looked at the wall for a moment and breathed carefully until it receded. Yeah, he said. Yeah, he was. They sat in the medical wing room for another 30 minutes and talked about things that weren't the warehouse and weren't the cafe and weren't even really about Damon. Bryce talked about Colton as a kid, the fishing trips, a story about a dog they'd found in a drainage ditch and kept for 2 years before their landlord found out. The way Colton had a habit of reading the last page of a book first and then being incapable of explaining why. Small things. The specific texture of a person that only the people who knew them could reconstruct. Damon listened. That was mostly what was needed. When they were done, Karis closed her unused legal pad and Bryce's nurse appeared in the doorway with the particular timing of someone who had been watching the clock, and Damon stood. Bryce looked up at him. Thank you for coming, Bryce said. Formal, stiff. The words of a man not accustomed to saying them and saying them anyway. Thank you for asking, Damon said. Same register. Same awkward sincerity. Bryce nodded once. He looked like a man who had set down something very heavy and wasn't sure yet what to do with his hands without it. Damon walked out through the medical wing and into the parking lot, into the cold afternoon air. He sat in his truck for a moment without starting it. He thought about what it meant to put something down after carrying it for a long time, not the relief of it, which was obvious, but the strangeness. The way the body doesn't know immediately what to do when the weight is gone. How it takes time for the posture to correct. He thought about this on the drive home. Maya was in the kitchen when he got back, doing homework at the table with her earbuds in, one foot tucked under her on the chair, a bowl with the remnants of cereal she'd decided to eat at 4 in the afternoon, because she was 12 and nutrition was theoretical. She looked up when he came in, pulled one earbud out, took in whatever his face was doing, and said, "You okay?" "Yeah." He hung up his jacket. Actually. She studied him for a second with the careful attention she gave to important things. Then she put the earbud back in and went back to her homework, which was its own form of acceptance, the particular grace of a kid who knows when to let a thing be. He made dinner. Maya set the table without being asked, which only happened when she'd read the room and decided this was a moment that called for it. They ate together, the two of them at the kitchen table, talking about normal things: the book report, Gerald the cat, and whether Renata might get a second one, whether blueberries were seasonal, a debate that had apparently not concluded. Maya argued her position with the enthusiasm of someone who had prepared for this specifically. Damon let her win on the grounds that she'd done the research and he hadn't, which was the honest reason. After dinner, she went upstairs. He washed the dishes. He stood at the sink and looked out the dark kitchen window at the backyard, at the swing set that was invisible in the dark, but that he knew was there. The particular knowledge of something you've built with your own hands in your own yard. His phone buzzed on the counter. A message from Celeste: finished the accessibility report for the county planning board. They approved the funding. The playground is happening. He looked at the message for a moment. Then he typed back, "That's good news. Tell me more tomorrow." Her response came quickly. "Tomorrow, then." He set the phone down. He turned off the kitchen light and climbed the stairs. He passed Maya's room, the door half open. The sound of whatever she was listening to, faint and indistinct. The stars and moons on her ceiling, barely visible from the hallway in the dark. He stood there for a moment the way he sometimes did, not for any particular reason, just the standing there. The particular fact of this room, with this kid in it, alive and intact and mildly irritated about seasonal fruit and Gerald the cat. Specific and irreducible weight of that. He went to his own room. He sat on the edge of the bed. The lockbox was on the shelf in the closet. He had not yet redistributed the things that had lived around the letter for 9 years: his discharge papers, Maya's birth certificate, a handful of other things that mattered enough to protect. He would do it eventually. Reorganize, make space for whatever came next. Not tonight. Tonight he sat on the edge of the bed in the quiet house and let the week settle into its final shape around him. Bryce Maddox in a medical wing with a letter from his dead brother, trying to figure out what came after a story that had just been dismantled. Colton Maddox, who had made a 4-second decision in bad terrain 9 years ago and had somehow, in the end, delivered a message anyway. Maya downstairs doing homework and arguing about blueberries. Celeste with her planning board approval and her accessible playground and the particular way she looked at problems as lists of things to address. Past settled. Not resolved, some things never fully resolved, but settled. The way sediment settles. The way the surface of water eventually goes still, even after something large has moved through it. He lay down. The ceiling was plain and white and without stars. He was asleep in 15 minutes, which was the most natural thing he had done all week. The first Saturday after everything settled, Damon went back to Willow Creek Cafe. He hadn't planned it as a statement. He hadn't thought about it in those terms, returning to the place where it started, the symbolic weight of the corner table, any of that. He went because it was Saturday morning and Maya had soccer practice, and he wanted coffee, and the cafe was where he went for coffee on Saturday mornings. That was the whole of it. The fact that ordinary life reasserts itself not through grand gestures, but through the simple repetition of small habits was something he understood, practically, the way he understood most things, not as a philosophy but as a lived fact that had proven itself over time. Celeste was already there when he arrived. Same table by the window, same laptop, same coffee that she'd refill twice before she left. She looked up when the bell above the door sounded, and she watched him cross the room without making an event of it, and he sat down across from her without asking, because somewhere in the weeks that had passed the question of whether the chair across from her was available had stopped being a question. "You look better," she said. "You look the same." He flagged down the server for coffee. Is that a compliment or an observation? Both, technically. She turned the laptop so it was angled slightly away from her. The gesture of someone setting work aside without making a production of closing it. I've been here 40 minutes trying to read a procurement report and mostly thinking about something else. Playground. The playground. She said it with a quality in her voice that was not quite satisfaction and not quite excitement, something more durable than either of those. Something that had been built rather than arrived at. The county planning board approved the full site last week. I've been working with an architect on the initial design framework, but there are structural elements, the activity towers, the ramp integration into the main climbing structure, some of the platform work that are outside her specialty. Damon wrapped his hands around his coffee mug. It was better than he remembered it being, which was probably more about the morning than the coffee. Show me the plans. She turned the laptop back toward him. The design was rendered in the clean architectural shorthand of preliminary planning lines and measurements and notations, the schematic skeleton of something that didn't yet exist. He leaned forward and looked at it properly, the way he looked at a piece of wood before he decided what it wanted to become. He could see immediately what the architect had solved well, and where the structural logic got complicated. The integration of the ramp system into the main platform was carrying weight assumptions that would cause problems in the build phase. And one of the activity towers had a foundation spec that was too conservative for the load it was going to bear, over 10 years of actual use by actual children. This section here, he said, pointing. The ramp joining the north platform. It's designed for compliance but not for durability. It'll pass inspection and start showing stress fractures inside 3 years. Celeste looked where he was pointing. I flagged that to the architect. She said it met code. Meeting code and being built right are two different conversations. He looked at the tower spec. And this foundation, if you're planning for a full range of users, including adult accompaniment on the platform, the load math needs to be recalculated. She's assuming a lighter average. Can you fix it? He looked at the plans for another minute. I can do better than fix it. I can rebuild this from the structural layer up, keep everything she's done well, the accessibility flow is good, the sight lines for supervision are right, and reinforce the parts that are going to fail. He looked at her. It'd take me a few weeks of design work before any build starts. And I'd want to walk the site. I'll take you there tomorrow if you want. What time? Morning, before it gets too cold. He nodded. He looked at the plans again, and he felt something he hadn't felt about a project in a while, not just the professional engagement of a problem to be solved, but something with more personal weight to it. Specific gravity of a thing that would exist in the world after you built it, that children would use, that would outlast the circumstances that produced it. He had built good furniture and good shelves and good custom kitchens, and those things mattered in their way, but this was different in a way he didn't need to articulate to know it was true. The accessible ramp I built at your house, he said. The secondary support rail along the underside, same principle applies here. It makes the structure more resilient than the spec requires, and it doesn't add significantly to material cost. I'd run it through every elevated platform transition. Write that down, Celeste said, before you forget which parts of your brain are being a carpenter, and which parts are being a person having coffee. He looked up at her. She had a slight quality at the corner of her mouth that wasn't quite a smile, and was something better than one, the expression of a woman who had decided she liked him and was not going to be excessively diplomatic about it. He felt it land somewhere in the vicinity of his chest. I have a good memory, he said. I've noticed. Write it down anyway. He borrowed a pen from her and wrote notes in the margin of a paper napkin, which was not how architects preferred to receive structural feedback, but which captured what needed to be captured. She watched him write with the focused attention she gave to things that mattered to her professionally, which he had come to understand was not separate from who she was personally. She was the same person at the table she was in the meeting, which was rarer than it should have been, and which he respected enormously. They stayed at the cafe for 2 hours. They talked about the playground, and then they talked about other things, and talking had the quality that good conversation has, when both people are paying actual attention, not performing interest. Not waiting for their turn, just genuinely present in the exchange. She told him about the early years of Rowan Adaptive, the specific texture of starting a company from a hospital bed, because there was nothing else to do with her mind while the rest of her was being reconstructed. She told it without self-pity and without the triumphant survivor narrative that people sometimes expected, just the plain version. It was hard. She made mistakes. She hired the wrong person twice before she hired the right ones. The first year nearly broke her financially, and then it didn't. He told her about Claire. He hadn't planned to. It arrived in the conversation naturally, in the context of something she'd said about the particular loneliness of rebuilding after a loss. And he talked about his wife with the directness of someone who has learned that the choice is between carrying things silently until it becomes a wall, or speaking it plainly so it can exist in the room, without taking up all the space. Claire had been funny and impatient, and an indifferent cook who was convinced she was an excellent one. She had loved Maya with a fierceness that had nothing careful about it. She had been sick for 14 months, and in those 14 months she had been, on alternate days, the bravest person he'd ever known, and the most frightened, and he had loved her in both versions with everything he had. And when she died, he had not known for a long time what shape a life was supposed to take without her in it. Celeste listened to this without trying to solve it or soften it, which was the right response, and not everyone found it. When he was done, she said, "She sounds like someone who took up a lot of space in a room." "She did," he said, in the best possible way. "Maya has it too," Celeste said. "The taking up space quality. I noticed it the first time you mentioned her." He looked at her. "You'd like her." "I think I probably would." A pause, careful and honest. "I think she might not immediately like me." 12 is a complicated age for new people. "She's protective," he said. "She'd come around." "What makes you think so?" He thought about Maya's question in Renata's apartment doorway. Is he going to be okay, the man? And the particular quality of a kid who could ask that about a person who had threatened her father, specific wideness of perspective that lived in a 12-year-old who'd already lost more than 12-year-olds should lose and had come through it without narrowing. "Because she's not actually as guarded as she seems," he said. "She just needs to decide you're worth it." Celeste held his gaze for a moment. "Seems fair," she said. "I can work with that." He walked her to her car. Afterward, she didn't need the assistance and didn't require it, but she also didn't send him off, which he took as the invitation it was. The morning had gone toward noon without either of them noticing, the way good mornings do. On the sidewalk outside the cafe, she looked at him with the direct assessment she brought to most things. "Tomorrow," she said. "The site. 8:30. I'll be there." She drove away. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the pale autumn sunlight of Silverbrook, New Hampshire, with the empty coffee cup still in his hand because he'd brought it out without noticing. And he stood there and thought about almost nothing, which was itself something, the particular lightness of a mind that is not currently managing a threat, or carrying a weight, or solving a problem, just existing in a moment that doesn't require anything of it. Picked Maya up from soccer practice at noon. She climbed in with her cleats in her hand and her shin guards still on, because some things don't change, and she was talking before she'd fully closed the door about a play she'd almost made, and the specific injustice of how Priya had gotten credit for a pass that Maya had clearly set up. And Damon listened and asked the right questions and made the right skeptical noises in the right places. And it was entirely ordinary, and he did not take a single second of it for granted. "Can we get lunch?" she said. "I'm starving." Practice was hard. "You're always starving after practice." "Practice is physically demanding, Dad." "I'm aware, so lunch." "There's food at home, there's leftover rice, and I think some cheese." "That's not lunch, that's a situation." She looked at him sideways. "Also, you look like you had a good morning. You should celebrate with lunch." "I look like I had a good morning?" "You have the face." "What face?" "The one where you're not actively worrying about something. It's different from your regular face." She said it without cruelty, just observation, the way she observed things. "It's a good face. I like it. We should get sandwiches." He got sandwiches. They sat at a table in a deli on Main Street and ate lunch and argued about whether the movie they'd been planning to watch that evening was actually good, or whether Maya had been overstating its quality to get him to agree to it. And she defended her position with the enthusiasm of someone who knew it was partially a lost cause and was committed to it anyway. And he let her win on the grounds that a Friday night, watching a questionable movie with his daughter, was not a situation that required him to be right. He was not a man who had ever been comfortable with happiness. He'd noticed this about himself years ago, in the abstract, the way you notice something about your own wiring that you didn't install and can't entirely change. Happiness had always felt provisional to him, always carrying the awareness of its own contingency, the knowledge that the thing you have is exactly the kind of thing the world sometimes takes back. The years after Claire had confirmed this instinct in a way that had made it harder to dismiss. But sitting across from Maya in a deli on a Saturday afternoon in November, watching her eat a sandwich with the focused intensity she brought to things she enjoyed, and argue her position on a movie she'd probably oversold him on, he felt something that didn't have the provisional quality. Something that felt less like happiness as a condition and more like rightness as a fact. Not permanent, he wasn't naive about permanence, but real. Grounded, the kind of thing you could stand on. He thought, this is what I came back for. Not from the warehouse. Not from the week with Bryce and the letter and the county medical facility. Back from the SEALs, back from the years of being a person whose primary function was to manage danger. He had come back for this specific ordinary thing, and he had found it, and it was enough. More than enough. He didn't say any of this. He ate his sandwich and let Maya win the movie argument and left a decent tip because the server had refilled their waters twice without being asked. and they drove home through Silverbrook in the pale Saturday afternoon. And the town was exactly what it was, small and specific and full of people living their particular versions of their lives. And he had lived here for 3 years, and it was, without qualification, home. Playground site was a 3-acre parcel in the eastern section of Silverbrook, adjacent to the elementary schools and the soccer field. A flat open space that had been a parking lot in a previous life and still carried the ghost of painted lines under the thin layer of soil the county had spread over it. Damon walked it with Celeste on Sunday morning, while the temperature hovered just above freezing and their breath made small clouds in the still air. She moved through the space with the practiced eye of someone who understood it professionally, not just as an architect or a CEO, but as someone who had learned to read physical environments the way Damon had learned to read rooms, through the specific education of needing to know what a space would and wouldn't allow. She pointed out the grade variations that would affect drainage, the sight lines from the proposed supervisory positions, the natural flow paths that the design should follow rather than contradict. He listened and contributed and disagreed twice, and was right both times, and conceded a point about the eastern drainage gradient that he'd initially been skeptical of, and turned out. Once she explained the subsurface water behavior in this specific soil type to be clearly correct. They worked well together. He had suspected this, and it was satisfying to have it confirmed. The particular satisfaction of finding a working rhythm with someone that doesn't require negotiation, where the expertise of each person is different enough to be complementary, and the communication is direct enough to be efficient. They spent 2 hours on the site, and he took measurements and photographs and notes that were better than napkin margin notes. And by the time they walked back to the parking area, he had a clear structural picture of what needed to happen, and a genuine enthusiasm for making it happen. The main climbing structure, he said, at her car, I want to build it from reclaimed oak if I can source it in the right quantities. It'll be heavier than the spec calls for, which actually helps the foundation math, and the weathering characteristics are better for a structure that's going to see New Hampshire winters. Reclaimed from where? There's a mill outside Concord that's been decommissioned for 20 years. The structural beams are still sound. I know the property owner. I did work for him 2 years ago. I can probably get access. He looked at the site. It would look different than a standard playground, more substantial, like something that's been there for a while. She looked at the site too. The empty 3 acres with the ghost of parking lot lines underneath, waiting to become something. I like that, she said. I want it to feel like it belongs here, like it was always going to be here. I can do that, he said. She turned and looked at him. The morning light was the particular flat gray of a November day that hasn't decided whether to commit to clouds, and she was in a dark green jacket he hadn't seen before, and her eyes in the gray light were exactly the dark brown they always were. And she looked at him with the direct attention she gave to things she was deciding about. Damon, she said, yeah, I want to say something, and I want you to let me say it without turning it into a conversation immediately. He waited. I know you've been through a hard year. I know some of that is older than this year. I know you're careful about what you let matter to you because you understand that things you let matter are things you can lose, and you've lost things. She held his gaze. I understand that better than you might think. I'm also careful for the same reasons. A pause. But I think we've been circling something for a few weeks, and I'm not built for circling. So I'm just going to say I'd like to see where this goes. Properly. Not coffee at the same cafe on Saturday mornings. Actually. He looked at her for a moment. That's a reasonable thing to say. I know it is. I'd like that too, he said. Properly. Something shifted in her expression, not surprise, because she hadn't been uncertain exactly. But a kind of arrival, the look of a person who has said the true thing and found the true thing returned. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. She drove away, and he stood in the parking area next to his truck in the gray November morning and felt not the provisional happiness, not the careful hopefulness of someone managing his own expectations, but something solid. Something with the weight of a thing that has been built rather than wished for. He went home and started drawing structural plans on the kitchen table, with Maya doing homework across from him, and she looked at the drawings with the skeptical interest of someone who didn't entirely understand them, but recognized they were serious. Is that the playground thing? She said. Yes. For the accessible playground? Yes. She looked at the drawings for another moment. That's a lot of wood. Reclaimed oak. From where? A decommissioned mill. That's kind of cool, actually, she said, and went back to her homework. which was the closest a 12-year-old could come to an architectural endorsement, and he accepted it as such. The work began in late November and ran through the winter in stages: design finalization, material sourcing, site preparation, and the first structural elements as the ground allowed. Damon spent more time with Celeste during those months than he would have predicted in October, which was the nature of collaborative work, and also the nature of two people who have decided to be honest about something and are now figuring out what that means in practice. It meant dinners, eventually not formal, not arranged, just the natural extension of working late at her kitchen table over plans and finding that neither of them had eaten. It meant that Celeste started appearing at soccer games, once and then with enough regularity that Maya noticed and processed it in her own way, which was to say nothing for 3 weeks, and then one evening announce at dinner, out of nowhere, that Celeste had sent her a link to an article about the physics of soccer ball trajectories, which Maya had read and found interesting, and that she thought Celeste probably had good taste in articles. This was the closest Maya came to an endorsement for several more weeks, and Damon understood it as the significant thing it was and did not push for more. Christmas came and went. Renata came for 3 days, and Gerald the cat did not, which Renata seemed to regard as a personal failing of the visit. Maya got the dog she'd been asking about for 2 years, a 3-year-old rescue named Louis, who was large and anxious, and had decided within 48 hours that Damon was the specific human he had been waiting for, which meant Louis followed Damon everywhere and collapsed across his feet the moment he sat down, which was inconvenient and also quietly one of the best things that had happened to him in a while. Celeste met Louis in January, and Louis sat on her feet for 20 minutes, which she accepted with the practical goodwill of someone who had made peace with the world doing things on its own terms. Maya witnessed this and filed it somewhere in her ongoing assessment. The assessment was going slowly in the right direction. Playground build started in earnest in March, when the ground gave up its frost and Damon could get the foundation work done properly. He hired 2 assistants from the county, a young man named Torres, who was quick and careful and asked good questions, and a woman named Pack, who had 10 years of construction experience and didn't need to be told anything twice. They worked well as a crew. He ran the structural build. Celeste managed the accessibility integration, and the system's elements, the rubberized surfacing, the tactile guidance paths, the sensory features that were part of what made the design genuinely inclusive rather than merely compliant, and they coordinated daily in the particular way of people who trust each other's expertise and don't need to supervise each other's work. It took 4 months of actual build, which for a project of this scope and ambition was efficient. The main climbing structure went up in April, the reclaimed oak beams dark and solid against the spring sky, carrying the patina of their previous life in a way that made them look, as Celeste had wanted, like they had always meant to be here. The ramp system integrated into the platform with the secondary support rail Damon had described on their first site visit, running the full underside of every elevated transition, invisible from the outside and structural in the way that mattered, built to absorb what 20 years of children would throw at it, rather than merely meeting the minimum requirement. He built the main platform deck from the same reclaimed oak, hand-planed to remove splinters, and sealed with 3 coats of a non-toxic finish that the accessibility specs required, and that he had tested himself on scrap material before committing to the full quantity. He built the activity panels with a solidity that was the direct descendant of the storage bench he'd been working on in his garage the day. Maya left for Renata's apartment the same philosophy of construction, the same conviction that a thing worth building was worth building to outlast the circumstances of its creation. He thought sometimes, during those months of construction, about what it meant to build things, about the particular nature of work that leaves something standing after you're done with it. He had spent 16 years in the Navy building nothing, or rather, building things that were designed to be temporary, tactical, operational, resolved, and moved past. He had spent 3 years building furniture and custom work, which was satisfying and honest, and served people who needed what he made. But this was something different. This was a thing that children with different bodies and different abilities and different relationships to the physical world would come to and find a place for themselves in, and they would not know who built it or why or what had preceded it. And that was entirely correct. The best work disappears into its function, becomes indistinguishable from the landscape it inhabits. He thought about Colton Maddox, sometimes, during those months. Not with the weight he had once carried it, but with the particular quality of thinking about someone who is gone and who mattered. He thought about the 4-second decision in bad terrain and the 14 paragraphs in a sealed envelope and the fishing trips a 7-year-old Bryce had taken with his older brother before their father left. He thought about the way certain things carry forward, not as ghosts, but as shape, as influence, as the invisible structure beneath visible life. He didn't hear from Bryce directly after January. He heard from Keller in February. Bryce had pleaded to reduce charges in exchange for cooperation, was serving a monitored medical release given his prognosis, was in a hospice facility outside Manchester. Keller told him this with the careful neutrality of a man delivering information without telling you what to do with it, which was one of the things Damon respected about him. He thought about going. He thought about it for 2 weeks. Then he called Keller and asked whether Bryce had expressed any desire to see him, and Keller said he hadn't. And Damon accepted this as its own kind of answer, that the conversation in the medical wing had been what it needed to be, that the letter had done what a letter could do, and that some things conclude without a formal ending, just a gradual settling into their final form. He hoped Bryce had some peace in those months. He didn't know whether he did. He accepted not knowing, which was its own practice, accepting the limit of what you can reach and releasing the rest. The playground opened on a Saturday in late June, which was the last week of school, and therefore a day that naturally produced children in large numbers and good spirits. County organized a small opening. A local official said some words that were shorter than expected, and therefore appreciated. The architect smiled in photographs. Celeste spoke briefly and precisely about what the project was and what it was for, and why accessible spaces were not charity or accommodation, but simply the correct understanding of who the public is. Damon stood to the side during the official part, the way he preferred to stand at events, close enough to be present, far enough to have perspective. Lewis was not there, having been deemed too large and too enthusiastic for a public event involving children, which he had accepted with the mournful dignity of a dog who did not understand decisions but trusted the humans making them. Maya was there. She stood beside him during the remarks with the particular posture of a 12-year-old at an adult event, slightly bored, slightly interested, alert in the way that her generation was alert at things, scanning rather than focusing. But when the ribbon was cut, an actual ribbon, red, with actual scissors, because some traditions earn their continued existence, and the children were let in, Maya watched them move through the space with an expression that Damon recognized because he had seen it on Claire's face in moments of genuine feeling that she hadn't prepared for. The first child through the gate was a girl of about 7 in a bright orange jacket, moving with the quick certainty of someone who had been waiting for this specifically, and she went directly to the main climbing structure and up the ramped access and onto the first platform and stood there for a moment, looking at everything that was available to her, and her face did what faces do when the world offers more than was expected. "You built that," Maya said quietly beside him. "We built it," he said. "A lot of people. You built the important parts." He looked at his daughter. She was watching the children with the open expression she usually kept managed, and the afternoon light was in her hair the way it sometimes was in the late June light, and she looked so much like herself, not like Claire, not like him, entirely her own person, this specific and irreplaceable girl he had not done enough right by and not done enough wrong by, and would spend the rest of his life trying to understand well enough to serve her properly. "I'm glad you're here," he said. She glanced at him sideways. "Where else would I be? I mean, generally. I'm glad you're here." He paused. "You're a good kid, Maya." "I'm an excellent kid," she said, with the exact tone that meant she knew the conversation was real and was deflecting it slightly because 12 years old is not the age for receiving this kind of thing directly. "Also, Lewis is at home, right now, absolutely destroying something. I can feel it. He was fine when we left. He's never fine. He's either actively destroying something or planning to." She looked back at the playground. The girl in the orange jacket had been joined by 3 other children on the platform, one in a manual wheelchair that the ramped access had delivered there as simply and cleanly as any other approach. "It's good," Maya said about the playground, about all of it, in the way she said things that mattered most simply, without decoration, meaning exactly what she said. "Yeah," Damon said. "It is." Celeste found him 20 minutes later, when the official part had fully dissolved into the actual afternoon children running and climbing, and the specific joyful noise of a space being used by the people it was built for. She navigated to where he was standing near the eastern platform and stopped beside him, and they looked at the playground together in the way of two people who have made something and are now watching it exist without them. The oak beams are already getting comments, she said. 3 parents asked about them. What did you tell them? That they came from somewhere that was finished with them, and now they're somewhere they're needed. She looked at the main structure. It's better than I thought it would be. I told you it would be. You said it would be structurally sound and aesthetically coherent. I'm saying it's better than that. She turned slightly toward him. There's a feeling to it. Like it was considered. Like someone thought about what it would feel like to be here. He looked at the oak beams, dark and solid in the June afternoon. I thought about it a lot, actually. I know. A pause. I have a meeting with the county next week about Phase 2. There are 2 other sites, one in Merrimack, one in Nashua. Same funding source, same design principles, larger footprint. She looked at him. I'm going to need a structural lead who understands what we're building and why. Is this a professional conversation? It's both, she said directly. At this point, everything with you is both. He thought about this for a moment, about what it meant to be at the beginning of something rather than the middle or the end. About the particular texture of that, the openness of it, the way it required a willingness to not know the outcome that he had spent years training himself away from. He thought about what Celeste had said on the sidewalk outside the cafe in November. I'd like to see where this goes, properly. And he thought about where it had gone, the dinners and the plans and the mornings on the construction site, and the slow, particular way Maya's assessment had shifted from careful to something warmer, and Lewis on her feet for 20 minutes the first time they met, and the way Celeste told the truth even when it was inconvenient, and expected the same in return, which was not a small thing, not a thing he had always been able to count on. I'm in, he said, for the next site. She nodded once, the efficient nod of someone filing confirmed information. Good. A pause. Softer. I'm glad. Maya appeared from the direction of the main structure, shin guards somehow already on, despite not having been wearing them when they arrived, with the expression of someone who has been doing reconnaissance. The ramp from the north side is my favorite part, she announced. Someone thought about the angle. Most ramps are too steep, and it makes the approach awkward. She looked at Damon. Was that you? That was the math, he said. Sure. She looked at Celeste. He does that. Takes credit away from himself and gives it to abstract concepts like math. I've noticed that, Celeste said. It's a thing. Maya looked at the structure again. Also, I think Lewis has definitely destroyed something at home, so we should probably go at some point. She paused, and then in the particular way she had of arriving at things by a different route than you expected. You could come for dinner, if you wanted. Celeste. There's enough food. She said it neutrally, which was not neutral at all, which both adults in the conversation understood precisely. Celeste looked at Maya for a moment with the direct attention she gave to things that mattered. I'd like that, she said. Maya nodded as if this was a normal conclusion to a normal sentence and went back toward the playground. And Damon watched her go and felt something in the vicinity of everything he'd been trying to protect for 3 years expand slightly, like a house adding a room, not replacing what was there, just recognizing that there was more space available than had been used. He thought about Claire. He did this sometimes, and it never required apology. She was part of the structure of him, part of how he had become the specific person standing in this specific place, and her absence was woven into the fabric of his days the way certain losses are, permanently and without resolution, because some things are not resolved. They are simply carried differently as time passes and the load redistributes. The stars and moons on Maya's ceiling were still there. He had never taken them down and never would. They were part of what the room was and what it meant and what it said to the girl who slept under them about the continuity between the life that had come before and the life that was still happening. Moving forward, he had learned, was still learning, did not mean the past was finished. It meant the past had become what it actually was, a foundation rather than a destination, something to stand on rather than return to. The late June afternoon was warm, and the playground was full of noise, and the reclaimed oak beams stood in the sunlight with the quiet confidence of things that have already proven themselves somewhere else and are doing it again here. And Damon Hale stood in the middle of all of it, the carpenter who used to be a SEAL, the father who was still figuring out what he was doing, the man who had carried a letter for 9 years and had finally, imperfectly, with considerable delay, done what he promised, and felt the particular rightness of a life that had been broken and rebuilt into something that didn't look like the original and was not supposed to. There is a thing that happens to people who have been through enough. Not all of them, and not automatically, and not without cost. But some people, after sufficient loss and sufficient time and sufficient honest reckoning with what the loss meant and what it didn't mean, arrive at a version of themselves that is not restored to what came before that version is gone. And mourning it is appropriate and also finite, but is instead something genuinely new. Not better, because better is not the right word for it. Truer, maybe. More accurately calibrated to what actually matters and less distracted by what doesn't. Damon was not finished becoming that. He understood clearly that he was not finished, that the work of a human life doesn't conclude at the resolution of a particular crisis, that the man who would show up for Maya's high school graduation in her first car and whatever came after was still being determined by choices he hadn't made yet and things he hadn't understood yet. He knew this and was not frightened by it in the way he once might have been. The not knowing had become something he could hold without clenching. He had a daughter who asked good questions and was excellent at soccer and had named the dog before Damon had gotten around to it. And the name was Lewis because she said he looked like a Lewis, and she was entirely correct. He had a woman beside him who told the truth and built things that lasted, and had looked at his imperfect, damaged, carefully reconstructed life and said, "I'd like to see where this goes," with the clarity of someone who understood the risk and was making the choice anyway. He had a playground built from reclaimed wood that would still be standing when the children running through it today had children of their own. He had, in the end, done the thing he had set out to do when he left the Navy and drove to Silverbrook with Maya in the back seat, and the particular desperate hope of a man who understood destruction and was trying to learn something different. He had built something meant to last. Lewis had, in fact, destroyed something at home. It turned out to be a throw pillow, which was both the best and worst case scenario, expensive enough to be annoying, insignificant enough to be funny. Maya discovered it the moment they walked in the door and delivered her verdict with the gravity of a judge who had seen this coming and was recording her prediction for the record, and Lewis sat in the middle of the pillow wreckage with the expression of a dog who regrets nothing and would do it again. Celeste laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that arrived without warning and didn't have any performance in it, a sound that belonged to a moment too ordinary and specific to have been prepared for. It filled the kitchen, and Lewis wagged at it, and Maya looked slightly surprised and then pleased. And Damon stood in the doorway of his house and listened to the sound of it and thought, yes, this, exactly this. He had stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. That, in the end, was the real thing, not the resolution of a threat or the completion of a project or the arrival of someone new in their lives. The real thing was the moment a man who had spent years braced for the next loss finally quietly, without announcement, unclenched. He set his keys on the hook by the door, the hook he'd installed himself, reclaimed iron, the same philosophy as the oak beams, and went into his kitchen to make dinner for his family, which was what it was, the word arriving without hesitation, without qualification, without the provisional quality that had attended everything good for so long. His family. The war was behind him. The past was exactly where the past belonged. And Damon Hale, former Navy SEAL, custom carpenter, single father who was no longer quite so single, stood in his kitchen on a June evening while Lewis ate the remaining stuffing from the destroyed throw pillow, and Maya explained to Celeste exactly why the dog was both a catastrophe and non-negotiable. And he made dinner, and the evening came in through the windows warm and unhurried, and it was enough. It was without question or apology more than enough.